All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a source document that lays out a very specific history of Palestinian groups and their use of armed actions. What we're going to do is break down the story this document tells, looking at its key claims and arguments one by one. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. Our explainer is broken down into 5 parts. We're going to follow the timeline just as our source material presents it, starting way back in the landscape after 1948 and drawing a line straight through to events happening today. So, right at the top, the source sets the stage by taking us back to the situation right after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. This is the foundation for everything that it claims follows. According to this document, here's the first key point it makes. In the aftermath of that war, there was no independent Palestinian state. Instead, the people living in the West Bank were under Jordanian control, and those in Gaza were administered by Egypt. Now, this is something you're going to see over and over again in this document. After pretty much every major claim, it includes this statement. It's the source's way of saying that everything it presents is based on information that anyone can go look up and verify for themselves. Okay, so from that starting point, the source moves on to a really big player in this story, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. The document zeroes in on the PLO's creation in 1964, and it makes a few really specific points here. First, that it was founded not in the West Bank or Gaza, but in Cairo, Egypt. It also notes it was created by Arab states, and that Yasser Arafat, who it specifies was also born in Cairo, later took over. But the most important point the source makes is about its very nature. It was designed from day one as an armed organization. So you can see how the source is building its case here, right? It's drawing this really straight, fast line from the PLO's formation to its growth as an armed power. And it argues this path pretty much guaranteed a major conflict was just around the corner. And that conflict, well, it came to a head in Jordan. The source claims the PLO got so powerful there, it basically created a state within a state. And according to the document, this wasn't just a political thing. It turned violent, with armed PLO groups hijacking commercial airliners and actually fighting the Jordanian army out in the open. This whole thing just blew up into a full-scale war that became known as Black September. And the human toll was, well, it was huge. The source points to estimates of as many as 10,000 people killed. The end result? King Hussein of Jordan kicked the PLO out of the country. Completely. So where do they go after being forced out of Jordan? The source says they relocated to Lebanon. And the document paints a picture of Lebanon at that time as a pretty fragile, divided country, which it claims became the PLO's new base of operations, and, according to the source, helped tip that nation into a devastating civil war. And from this new base, the source argues, the fight went global. It then lays out this string of international terror attacks that it attributes to various Palestinian groups. And look at this list. The source is really emphasizing that these weren't regional skirmishes. These were attacks targeting civilians all over the world: Sudan, France, Italy. And it makes a point of noting how often Americans were the victims. And to really hammer home the human cost, the source zooms in on just one of those events. You see the 1985 airport attacks on that list? Well, this document reports that those coordinated attacks in Rome and Vienna alone left 19 people dead and something like 140 wounded. Okay, so after laying out all of that, the source then pivots, and this is a really critical part of its argument. It creates this very deliberate contrast, putting all these attacks side by side with the major peace talks that were happening in the very same time frame. And this is the central point the source is making, this juxtaposition. You've got these landmark peace deals happening, Israel with Egypt, then with Jordan, and even the start of the Oslo peace process with the PLO itself. But, and this is the document's big counter-argument, the attacks from Palestinian factions didn't stop. The source is adamant that they continued right on through all of these diplomatic efforts. So that brings the source's whole narrative right up to the present day. And it frames the group Hamas not as something new or different, but as the next chapter in the same story it's been telling all along. The document then focuses on the October 7th attack, calling it the deadliest terror attack in Israel's history. And it gives very specific numbers. Around 1,200 people murdered and 251 taken hostage back into Gaza. And just to really underscore that this wasn't only an Israeli tragedy, the source points out that the victims came from many different countries. It specifically highlights that more than 40 American citizens were killed and that Americans were also among the hostages. And really, this is what it's all been building to. This is the core conclusion of the source material. It argues that what Hamas did on October 7th wasn't some shocking new development. Instead, it claims this is perfectly consistent with a long historical pattern of Palestinian groups using terror as their main weapon, a pattern the document has spent this entire time trying to prove. And that's where the document leaves us. It ends with this really provocative question. After laying out its version of history, decades of what it calls documented massacres, hijackings, and murders of civilians, it turns to the reader and asks, with this history, why does the narrative of victimhood persist? A challenging final thought to end our explainer on this particular source.